in just a moment. And we are going to record the meeting, but the intention is just to preserve this for anyone who's missing this meeting that would ordinarily be here, right? So no wide distribution, just if we have some colleagues that join late or are not able to join us at all today. So I want to introduce Jenny and Paul from Quantum Governance. I have the privilege of talking to governance folks from time to time, and they just brought a very fresh perspective that I really enjoyed and wanted to share with this group. So Jenny, Paul, I will turn it over to you guys. This is our System Governance Council. So we have governance leaders from across the medical system in our hospitals, often governance committee chairs, board leaders, and senior members of management. So thank you guys for joining us today to talk about what's new in governance.
Terrific. Thanks, Aaron. Hi, I'm Jenny Bowden, and I'm the CEO of Quantum Governance. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And we are excited to talk about governance with you and share with you our perspectives. And I'll let my colleague Paul introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Dion. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and Lead Consultant with Quantum and work closely with Jenny. I have a background in social science. I'm a trained anthropologist, and I also bring an MBA. So I have a nice mix of sort of soft skills and hard business skills that I bring to the table. And I love working with boards and leadership teams on finding ways to get better and to level up. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you all today.
Terrific. Thanks, Paul. I didn't share anything about my background, but I've been in the not-for-profit sector my entire career, except for a few misled years working in advertising right out of college, and decided that that wasn't for me. I needed to be in a mission-led, mission-driven organization. And so after that, I moved very quickly to the not-for-profit sector. I often will say that I've had every job from executive assistant to executive director and beyond within the charitable not-for-profit sector. Part of the reason that I'm driven to do this work is that I was a chief staff officer twice and had challenging relationships with my board, and came to realize that that was probably the most important governance relationship within a governing system, and so feel really driven to ensure that those relationships are really strong and that boards are really strong indeed. Just 2 seconds on who Quantum Governance is. As you can see, our vision is exceptional leadership for mission-driven organizations. We only work with not-for-profit organizations, and we only focus on governance and strategy at the board levels and at the C-suite levels only. We're not a for-profit consulting practice. Neither are we a not-for-profit consulting practice. And so we're somewhere kind of in the middle, a hybrid, which is called an L3C, a low-profit limited liability firm. And we're dedicated to the public good. And for us, that public good is you and the work that you're doing within the University of Maryland medical system. Next slide, please. Just wanted to give you a quick update, a quick overview of the agenda we're going to cover today. We're going to just do some best practices on rethinking governance. I'll take that part of the agenda this morning, and then Paul will cover building the ideal board of the future. I think that was one of the areas when we were having some discussions that really piqued Aaron's interest in particular. And then we'll end and leave at least 15 minutes or so for Q&A. If you have a burning question throughout the presentation, though, certainly this is time for you to learn and ask questions. And so, if something's on your mind in the middle of the presentation, you're worried you won't remember, or you feel like it's particularly important to ask that question at that moment, feel free to interrupt. So our focus here really is on rethinking governance. I would say one of the things I love about working at Quantum is, and I've been here for well over a decade, is that we're always looking to learn as a firm.
It looks like Jenny just paused. Oh no, we may have lost her. Well, fortunately, I can also do this section. So I'm going to pick up and hopefully Jenny will be able to join us soon. So when we do the rethinking governance piece, we start with the basics, right? And we start to wonder, well, what is governance? And try to establish a baseline understanding for everybody to more or less be on the same page. Everybody sort of has an understanding in their heads of what governance is, and it probably includes some of these words, right? Steer, direct, establish policies. And then if you've been at it for a while, you're definitely aware of this, but you may or may not have surfaced it as a conscious element of governance. It's the influence piece, it's the persuasion piece, right? There's a lot of soft power. Jenny commented. I'll just make a quick response. So there's also an influential side to governance that's less formalized. And particularly you're thinking about you're sitting on a board or you're involved working with a board that is all volunteer. You don't necessarily have formal levers to hold people accountable, right? To be able to get people to follow the way of the group. And so that soft power is an important piece that we like to emphasize. And of course, governance is about the legitimate distribution of authority throughout the system. But another element that we like to emphasize and remind people about is that governance is it's a systemic kind of process, and it goes all the way down through the system, right? It's not just something that the board does and holds and owns. It goes into the CEO and the executive team and all the way down. Anybody who's managing a person is basically part of the governance system. So we do work exclusively with boards and leadership teams, but we like to remind everybody and emphasize the fact that government goes all the way down through the system. And if we think about the core roles and responsibilities of board directors, here are some that we'll put up and talk through really briefly. And the point here really is to understand that it's much more than just occupying that chair, right? And making decisions with the board. I start at the top with the stewardship, ethics, and integrity piece. That's kind of like table stakes, right? If you don't have those pieces, you have no business serving on a board. You need to be an ethical person. You need to move and behave with integrity. And you need to be a good steward of the organization that you're on the board of. Jenny, are you back with us?
I am, but I'm concerned about my connection, so why don't you continue just in case?
Okay, feel free to jump in at any moment where it feels like it's stable.
Okay.
So the stewardship, ethics, and integrity, of course, is table stakes. We expect, and you know that's something that everybody needs to have going in, and it's a critical piece. Moving clockwise, the second piece that we like to talk about and we work frequently on with boards and leadership teams is that chief executive officer support and oversight. Now, for a typical, I know this is not the case for you all, but for a typical nonprofit or non-for-profit board, the response when we ask about that is people say, well, the board's job is to hire and fire the CEO. That's our job. And that sounds kind of harsh to the ears of a CEO. And so we like to focus more on the support and the oversight and having a positive working relationship between the board and the CEO. And Jenny will share a little bit more on that when we get to that section. The budget and the resources, of course, is a fundamental element for responsibility for board directors, oversight on those elements, fulfilling your fiduciary obligations, right? You have legal duties when it comes to those matters, and that's a key piece as well. When we think about performance and results, often we're thinking about the organization as a whole, right? Making sure that the goals and the metrics fit the mission and what you're trying to achieve with the organization, and also really working closely with the CEO and the senior management team to ensure that those things are happening and that progress is being made. And so the board is playing an important role in that element as well. And there is a piece of co-creation, right? There's the oversight piece, but there's also the strategic focus element that the board helps provide for the CEO and the leadership team to make sure that they're fulfilling the strategic pillars, that they're fulfilling the mission, and they're moving in the right direction. The board provides that long-term perspective and that long-term view, which leads us to the strategic thinking, learning, and planning. This is a piece where we also work closely with boards on, helping them define their strategic focus, helping them understand that your role as a board member is much more than just fulfilling your legal obligations, right? You also really are stewards of the organization and helping to carry the organization forward. We'll spend a little bit more on that topic coming up. And then finally, of course, community outreach. Sometimes folks take that for granted. It is an important part of your role. You are volunteers, you're serving on a board, your organizations are committed to the public good. And it's important to make sure that you're out in the community representing the organization, sharing the good news of the work that you're doing and the impact that you're providing in your communities. Jenny, it looks like you're fairly stable.
Sure, I'll take over. So when we think about board leadership, we actually think about the positions in kind of new ways, in ways that actually stretch the positions. Paul, if you want to advance. When we think about the chair position, we think about it in terms of the board manager in chief. We'll often ask our clients, should the boards manage anything? And of course, the answer is you shouldn't be managing the day-to-day operations of your hospital or medical facility, but you should be managing as chair the board. When we think about the vice chair, we think that the vice chair is already in learning mode, right? Learning to become potentially the board chair at some point. And so we term the vice chair the board learner in chief. They're in that learning mode. And so we suggest that the vice chair should also be tasked with identifying important educational opportunities, important trainings that are relevant for the entire board, so that the vice chair is not only in learning mode for themselves, but also bringing that learning to the board. Paul mentioned strategic thinking, learning, and planning just moments ago when he was talking about the roles and responsibilities of the board. And you note that we put learning in there, not just strategic thinking and planning, but learning. Learning is a really important part to ensure that as board members, you're staying, really relevant and that you're able to have the strategic discussions in the boardroom at the same level as the CEO and the management team, so that you're able partners as you're, forging ahead in terms of strategy. When we think of secretary, we definitely don't think of somebody who just reads the minutes that were likely typed up by somebody on the CEO staff, approves them, and then sends them out or circulates them. We think of the secretary as being the board builder in chief. Think Secretary of the Navy, right? A really, really fundamental job. The secretary, typically from our point of view, would be the chair of the governance or governance and nominations committee. They would be the right-hand person to work with the board chair and the CEO on building the board. A governance and nominations committee or a governance committee is tasked with the effective functioning of the board. So for our point of view, it makes sense that the secretary is the board builder in chief. When we think of the treasurer, we think of the board translator in chief, right? Oftentimes you may have somebody on your board who's incredibly adept at taking 36 spreadsheets and being able to understand all of them. But not everybody can do that, right? Everybody comes with different sets of skills and backgrounds and experiences. And so we think of the treasurer as somebody who works with the CEO, the CFO, whoever it might be within your organization to translate those 36 spreadsheets into dashboards, into flow charts, into pie charts, into tables, so that the board really is able to take in that financial information, digest those 36 pages of Excel spreadsheets into something that's readable, that's manageable, so that you're able to actually make really good financial decisions. The best treasurer I ever saw was actually a marketing guy. Nobody wanted the job at the organization. Nobody wanted to do it. And he said, fine, I'll do it. And he was a really great treasurer because he kept saying to the CFO, I don't understand. Draw me a picture. What do you mean by that? He kept pushing and pushing and pushing until the financial picture was clear enough so that he would understand it. Not that he was a dummy, right? He was a marketing guy at a really large Fortune 50 company, but so that it was really self-evident to him. And he knew if it was self-evident to him, it would be self-evident to everybody else on his board. Reframing of the role of the board officers. Next slide. The role of board level committees, and I was really happy to see in the chat, somebody posted, let's see who it was. It's gone now, but somebody had posted that, or it's gone from mine because I came out and went back in, that they had a really active governance committee. Let's take a look at the role of board level committees from our point of view. It's a little different in your organizations. Oftentimes we'll come in to begin to work with organizations, and we'll find that board level committees are often doing the work of management, not the work of the board. And I don't suspect that that's likely the case here for you, but important to ensure, right, that the board level committees are chartered to do the work of the board and not management. Sometimes I was with a $1.3 billion credit union over the weekend. They had 10 board level committees, 10 board level committees. When I left, they came to agreement that they would have 4 moving forward, right? Most of those, right? 6 of those were operational in nature. The idea with committees is that you are, outsourcing the work of the board to a more diverse group of people. And even from our point of view, and I don't know if this would align with your bylaws, potentially bring in committee members. Sometimes it's a good way of bringing in community members onto your committee. They become committee members, and it's a good way of potentially vetting future board members as well. Next slide, please. The elements of good governance. We wanted to share this briefly with you, and Paul, you can go to the next slide. We conducted this research within the credit union space, another area that we work in heavily, and it was such a strong bit of research that we have done that we are sharing it with other sectors, other divisions in the nonprofit sector, because we believe it's so fundamental. We were finding in our work there that there were these 4 key elements of good governance. And we were seeing it just anecdotally in our work, and we wanted to know if it was really the case that these 4 areas were highly correlated. And so we did some national research on these four key areas, surveying folks in the credit union space, from board chairs all the way down to all of the members of their audit committees, members of their senior staff, including their CEOs. And what we found was, indeed, these 4 areas of good governance are highly, highly correlated. I think the lowest correlation was 0.79 and the highest was 0.88. And what we found was essentially that if one of these areas tends to be low within a board, the others tend to be low. Likewise, if one tends to be strong, the others tend to be strong. And what this means for boards in general is, if you're having some challenges with accountability or engagement, for example, it could eventually, and you have a strong level of trust, it could eventually drive down your levels of trust within the board. And it doesn't take a lot. I've been in retreat with a board that had low levels of accountability. It wasn't really clear why they had low levels of accountability. Their trust was kind of on the edge, and it took me a half a day to be in retreat with them, and I could see that they had a bully on their board, and nobody was doing anything about it. The chair wasn't calling the bully out. It was subtle. The bullying was subtle, but I thought, there's no way that the quieter members of the board are going to speak up for fear of being bullied, for fear of being shut down. The lack of accountability in this case was driving down engagement, and it resulted ultimately in lower levels of trust within that board. So all of these elements are key and really should be paid attention to. And we share that with you again from a different division of the not-for-profit sector, but the correlations were so strong and so relevant that we feel like it is likely relevant all across the not-for-profit sector. Next slide, Paul. So what are the benefits of a high functioning board? If you'd like to just post in the chat from your perspective, what do you feel really that are the benefits of a high functioning board? As the one person who wrote that their governance committee was really active and their committees in general were really active and there was good discussion in the boardroom. Certainly the good discussion in the boardroom, I would say, is definitely a benefit of a high functioning board. Are there others? You can either put them in the chat or share them verbally as well. Aaron shares that it makes management up its game. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? We've had clients say everything from when you have a high functioning board, it flows throughout the organization and it can be seen community wide. Tyrese says they're engaged and they ask a lot of questions, which results in accountability. I 100% agree. Tyrese, we will often say a board member's most important responsibility is asking good questions. I couldn't agree more. We'll also hear some clients say things like, it will increase the health of the relationship between the board and the chief staff officer. Again, probably the most fundamental governing relationship that there is. Paul, do you want to advance to the next slide? We share with you these elements that we believe drive high functioning boards of directors, right? They range from the strategic, right? They know the organization's why. They know their purpose, their role, their responsibilities. They stay at a strategic level, right? To some of those roles and responsibilities that Paul talked about, right? They know ethics and integrity matter and they safeguard those things, right? The CEO and the board work in constructive partnership, and I'll define for you in a moment what constructive partnership looks like. Emily shares that they often offer a broader 2 steps back perspective that may identify gaps or opportunities those more in the weeds do not see immediately. Absolutely, Emily. That's a great observation. We had a client once, a Jewish community center that was considering opening on Saturdays. And the staff had done all this research. They had talked to their donors, they had talked to members, they had talked to other Jewish community centers all around the country to get information and to present their position and their research to the board. They present the position, the research to the board, and a board member raises his hand and says, "Did you ask the rabbi? Did you ask the rabbi?" They hadn't asked the rabbi, right? They've asked everybody else. They hadn't asked the rabbi. They were in the weeds. They did a great job doing the research, right? Just as Emily said, right? They missed the big question. Did you ask the rabbi? By the way, the rabbi said, absolutely. We're about building community, open on Saturdays. I've been wondering for a long time why you haven't been. But having that big perspective, that broader perspective, as Emily said, that 2 steps back perspective is key. Paul? The constructive partnership, I've mentioned it a couple of times. It's what drove me out of being a chief staff officer for a not-for-profit. And it's, as I said, the most fundamental relationship, governing relationship. And here's how we describe it. You can have an organization that's highly board focused with high board authority, or highly executive focused with high executive authority, right? We believe that it should be balanced with a constructive partnership. And your structure is a little different, right? There is the larger organization, right? The larger system that you have to balance as well. But the relationship that you have between your board and your CEO is what we're talking about here. Next slide, Paul. We believe that the constructive partnership is like Venus and Serena Williams playing doubles tennis, right? They're not asking who's in charge. They're saying who's in the better position at this moment to get the ball as it comes across the net. Who is in the better position to get the ball as it comes across the net? And that's what a constructive partnership is, right? Does the board at this moment have that broader perspective that Emily mentioned, right? Are they asking the right questions that result in accountability that Tyrese mentioned, right? Is that the role? Is that the ball that the board should be returning across the net, right? Who's in the right position to return which ball? And that is what a constructive partnership is. Clearly, there are legal authorities, right, that start and end in both camps, right? Senior management does not hold the ultimate legal authority. But it's not about legal authority. It's about the relationship and how well you're playing doubles tennis together for the good of the organization, for the good of your patients and your communities. Paul?
Thanks, Jenny. This is the second part, looking forward really, and thinking about how to build the ideal board of the future. We're aiming for a high-performing board, right? We're aiming for a blue ribbon board, and we'll share some insights on how you can get there. In keeping with what Jenny talked about with the strategic focus and the importance of the board in fulfilling that role, it shouldn't be too surprising that if you want to have a strategically focused board, you need to have strategic board members, right? A lot of times when people think about board composition, they start with professional backgrounds. They say, gosh, we need a butcher, we need a baker, we need a candlestick maker, right? And then we'll have a good board. We'll have a nice, diverse board. And yes, that's important. We wouldn't suggest that you don't want to do that. But we also encourage folks to think about what kind of butcher are you getting? What kind of baker are you getting? Do they have an ability to focus on the future? Do they bring a consensus building approach to their work? Do they bring independent mindedness, right? There are other skills and characteristics that you want to include in the process in composing your board of the future. And those are really important skills as well, right? It goes far beyond somebody's professional background and their experience. There's a lot more that goes into it. We did some research. Again, this was mostly with credit unions, but we do think it's probably relevant to you. You tell us on what people value in the boardroom versus what their priorities are when it comes to recruiting. So I know there's a lot of data here. And really, I want you to think about those orange lines. Those orange bars are the most valuable skills and characteristics in the boardroom. So we asked people, what do you value most in the boardroom? And as you can see, overwhelmingly, an ability to focus on the future is really important and valued, right? And I suspect that many of you would agree. Independent mindedness is right up there. Financial literacy, right? An ability to understand the finances and fulfill your fiduciary obligations is pretty important for any board member to have, right? Understanding the membership, of course, credit unions have members, just insert patients there, right? And you can imagine the value of that as well. Consensus building. So those are what people value in the boardroom. And of course, if you're looking to build an ideal board of the future, you might want to include those elements in your search and screen process, right? In your vetting process to ensure you're bringing in people that have those skills and those capabilities. What was interesting in this research is in a completely different question, we asked folks, what are you looking for in new board members, right? What do you prioritize when you're recruiting people? And those are the blue bars. And you can see they don't line up with the orange bars, right? The top scoring question, the main concern that people had when they were thinking about recruiting was demographic diversity, right? 53%, followed closely by specific operational expertise, 48%, and then professional services expertise. So they're looking for the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. They're thinking about demographic diversity because they want to have a demographically diverse board for various reasons. They value that in the recruiting. Then for some reason, once you get in the boardroom, what is valued is different, right? There's a mismatch there. And we think that's that's worth bringing up and sharing so people can have it in their consciousness and be aware of that. And this is something actually we'll do some more research on in the coming years to try to understand what is that delta, what's going on there? Why do people recruit for one thing, but then they value something different in the boardroom? When we work with our clients on developing an ideal board of the future and really aiming for that high performing board, we help them build an ideal board of the future profile, right? If you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to have a hard time finding those people, right? So we start with a board survey to really understand what are those qualities, traits, characteristics that you need on your board that you're looking for. And then we'll compare that with national data, right? So we have this database that we use to get a sense of nationally where our boards and leadership teams focused on. And then we'll develop a matrix of skills and demographics for your current board to get a sense of where you are currently in the present moment. And that can help identify strengths as well as identify opportunities to better strengthen your board going forward. If you have an opening or two openings, it'll give you a sense of who to look for. We also have a facilitated conversation with the board because collecting these data and compiling them is an important part of the process, but you also need the board to have the awareness and the understanding of what they're looking for and what they're hoping to achieve going forward. It's not really just a question of collecting the data. You need the board to understand what the data are saying, how to absorb it, and then use it going forward in identifying people for the future. And as I've been saying, it's really important to evaluate competencies as well as character, right? Those hard skills and those soft skills, because you really want to have the right person on your board, right? I'll pick on Aaron, I'll pick on the legal people, right? You can imagine, hey, we need an attorney, we need a lawyer on our board, right? We need somebody with legal skills that can help us with that piece of our oversight. But you don't want necessarily an attorney who's focused on the commas in the wrong place, right? That's not the kind of attorney you want on the board, or at least you don't want them to necessarily be an attorney on the board, right? You want them to use their background and their skills to help the board think forward, to help the board achieve their strategic objectives, right? Have that long view. Think about ways of holding the senior team accountable to the strategic goals and really helping them achieve those goals. So when you think about the nominations process, you're going to approach it differently, right? With this board matrix in place, with the sense of who you're looking for and how do you build that high performing board of the future. We have a 5-step process that we work with folks on. First one, of course, is developing that profile. If you don't have the profile, if you don't know who you're looking for, right, you're going to end up with some strong candidates, but they may not be the best match for you. They may not be the best fit for your board. You want to cast a wide net. Often our clients work closely with the HR teams of the organization because those are the experts at the end of the day, and they understand how to do the recruiting process and to do it effectively. But you want to have at the top of your funnel, your recruiting funnel, as many people as you possibly can, right? The more strong qualified candidates you have, the better you're able to understand who are going to be the best ones, right? You don't want, if you need an attorney, I'll stick to the attorney stuff. You don't want only 1 or 2 attorneys applying or interested. You want as many as possible so you can look for those other characteristics and find the right person. Third, you want to carefully vet them, right? So that see who fits best with the profile, with the competencies, the attributes. You're not only going to ask interview questions based on the person's resume, right? The interview questions are where you have an opportunity to understand where they are on those soft skills. Where do they line up on the strategic elements that you're valuing? So you really want to focus on those pieces as well. Then you appoint and you seat those new board members. And many boards make the mistake of thinking, all right, we're done. This is the end of our process, right? We've brought in these strong candidates and hey, congratulations, let's go celebrate. There's a 5th step. You need to implement a robust onboarding program for your new board members, right? You need to make sure that they integrate with your board, they understand what what's expected of them, and that they're able to perform at a high level. If you bring in these high-performing board members and you don't show them the ropes, right? There's a lot of what in education we call hidden transcripts, right? There's a lot of understandings that you have on the board that's not written down, that's not explicit, that you need to communicate and share that with them so they understand. They need a board mentor, right? Oftentimes we try to assign a board mentor, somebody who can show them the ropes, who can help them understand, oh yeah, when Bill is talking about that thing, he means this, right? Or when we do this in the board meeting, it feels weird, but it's because of XYZ that happened in the past. And that's why we do it this way. We find it's more efficient, right? You have somebody who helps them understand what's going on so they can integrate more quickly and really so they can be successful and share their gifts, right? If somebody doesn't feel included, they don't feel like they're part of the team, they're much less likely to share their gifts with the board. So that's a really important piece. And you want to be thinking about it before you even start step one, right? Are we going to have a strong onboarding program to bring people along? And we're going to pause there. We wanted to give ample time for folks for questions and answers and to really have a dialogue about the insights that we've shared with you today. So who would like to kick us off? Who'd like to have some questions? Feel free to put in the chat or just unmute and ask away. Bill, it looks like you're ready.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. You talked about obviously onboard, not onboarding, but finding members. What is your recommendations on what sources you use to find candidates for the board? That, to me, in the past, especially for nonprofits, that sometimes, because you don't just want board members recommending people they know that would be on the board. So how do we go about a process of casting that wide net?
Yeah, it's everything and all of them, right, Bill? So part of it is asking board members to activate their networks. Oftentimes it includes the CEO and the senior staff to activate their networks. But you also want to leverage any professional associations or community associations that you interact with as a board or as an organization, and really build some relationships so you can show up and say, hey, we've got an opening coming up next year, and we'd love to see some folks from your organization apply, right? We could really benefit from having you join the board. It would be mutually beneficial. Those relationships with community organizations or professional organizations, you really can't show up on day one and expect to get people to apply, right? You need to have a long-standing relationship. So that work might even start for you today, right? To build those connections and start to build those relationships. So when you have an opening in the future, it's not the first time that you show up at the meeting, right? So those organizations and networks can always be extended and deepened. We also like to see folks work on LinkedIn, right? There's sometimes it's a broader call. You can use LinkedIn, you can use social media, all of the marketing and communications channels that exist for your system can be activated for this purpose. So it's sort of an any and all, and it's absolutely needs to go beyond just the board members. Especially you're thinking about diversity. There's a lot of elements to diversity, right? As I mentioned, and so you want to get more than just the people in your immediate circles that are interested in applying. Marlene, you have your hand up.
I do.
And
Thank
Jenny,
you.
you're on mute. And can I just interject, Paul, could we bring the screen down? That way we could all probably see each other. It'll be
Yes, absolutely.
more interactive.
Yeah, Marlene, can I just add two things really quickly and then we'll come to you? I to round out what Paul had suggested, if I may. Paul had suggested earlier, tap into your HR departments, right? Look at how, as he said, look at LinkedIn, look at online ads, right? It's a good way for you to cast that wide net, but also to promote the good work that your hospital or medical facility is doing in the community. We also have a lot of clients who are using professional recruiters. Now that may or may not be something that's within your financial, means or your budget, but I'll tell you, you likely have some of those folks on your HR staffs who have those kinds of skills, have the same kinds of skills as professional recruiters. Tap into your marketing folks, tap into your HR folks. As Paul said, community relationships. And I can't stress enough, you can find the right person with the right resume, but if they don't have the right soft skills, the right human skills, it's not worth it. Yeah, sorry, Marlene.
Yes, thank you. How transparent do you recommend this nomination process be for board members who are not members of the nominating committee?
Oh, that's a great question. Paul, do you want me to start or do you want to?
Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, so it's a great question because it gets to the fundamental nature of what are the purpose of committees, right? And how do you build trust in your board as well? Here's the thing about committees. If you delegate, if the board as a whole delegates a job or a set of responsibilities to a board level committee and then doesn't trust the committee to do the work, you're going to have challenges with the relationships between and among board members. Now, does that mean when a committee brings back a set of recommendations or ideas to the full board that the board can't ask for more information or say, why do you recommend this? Or, hey, we'd like a little more research on that? No, absolutely not. Or that the board members, that you may not have a unanimous vote on whatever it is that a particular committee recommended. All of that is fine. The idea is to have good communications around it. Now, specific to nominations, I do think it should be a delegated responsibility. And I do think the board, right, if you have a really good, transparent process, the board should trust the members of the nominations committee around that process. I think the process needs to be developed and shared with and by the full board, right? That's why we look towards you all developing your own profiles. They'll be different for each hospital, right? A hospital on the Eastern Shore is gonna potentially have a different looking board than one in Baltimore City, than shock trauma, right? It's gonna be different, and that's good, and that's okay. That's what you want. So you need to develop your profiles as a group so that when you then charge the nominations committee, here's what we're looking for. The whole board can feel confident that that's what the nominations committee is going to go and recruit. You also need to give that nominations committee, and we can send you a follow-up slide on this. We didn't include it here, but we have a follow-up slide on kind of how to carefully vet. You also need to give the nominations committee the tools they need to really vet, right? To really do that job. And it could be everything from psychodynamic testing, right? Like, in the olden days, it would be Myers-Briggs. People use Clifton Strength Finders. There's all kinds of other tools, right? That you can use, psychodynamic testing. It could be, ensuring that you don't just do a quick lunch with a potential board member, but there's a formal hour-long interview with, specific question sets that you use for every single candidate. That there's that the process is really clear. That you are assessing, that those interview questions are developed to assess against that profile you created. So transparency is key around the process, and I think developing it together as a group, and then trusting your nominations committee to really do its work. It doesn't mean that you can't have questions about the work that they did when they bring it back to you, but I think you have to trust your colleagues. I
So
hope that answers your question.
a question on that. Obviously, that's the board committee, and I agree with what you're talking about there. The CEO's part of participating in those interviews and everything else. Where do you see the engagement from the CEO? Right at the beginning? To me, it's important to have the CEO engaged throughout the whole thing, but I was just curious where your thoughts are.
We would agree, Bill. I'm jumping in because nominations is one of my favorite projects. Yes, part of that constructive process, right? Or constructive partnership, right? You want them engaged in the discussions that you have about the profile, about the process, about tapping into their HR departments, their marketing departments, and the like. I also think you want them engaged in all of the interview processes, right? Here's why. The CEO has a voice, but not a vote, right? Some folks will say, oh, but isn't the CEO going to kind of stack the board with the folks that are going to be really, they have a voice. They don't have a vote eventually on who the nomination A puts forth, and B, who the board, decides to bring on board. They just have a voice. Likely, unless you have the kinds of board members who are in a position to do a lot of hiring over their careers, your CEO has probably hired more people than many of the people on the nominations committee, or at least as many. And so I think they're a good judge of character too. So I think it's important.
Charles.
Yes. So what are your thoughts on board terms and whether there should be term limits?
What is the current state for you all?
For us, our term is 6 years. Few people re-up, but I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Do you mean few people re-up
For another
beyond
6.
for another 6? I see. And are you asking about the, term limits and ways of sort of keeping the tenure of a board member at a certain level, or are you trying to encourage people to come back?
Well, no, I'm just wondering if there's a sweet spot where you find that maybe it's time to get some fresh blood, or maybe there's burnout.
I see. I see.
Just wondering if there's any thoughts on that.
So the answer, I think, varies a little bit. That is one place where we've found that different sectors have different sort of sweet spots, if that makes sense. So I work a lot with credit. I'll use credit unions, for example. It's an area that I have a specialty in. They tend to want to keep people on the board longer because they're complicated financial institutions, and it just takes a while for folks to kind of learn the business, right, and be able to contribute in a meaningful way. And so they tend to have a longer tenure, right? They want board members to come on, and once they've onboarded and bring them up to speed, they want them to stick around for a while. It's 6 years is closer to average, and sometimes it's more like 9 for credit union boards. So I don't want to wade in your context and come up with a number without really better understanding where the context is. But I would say you want to think about what is the average tenure. It sounds like it might be 6 years. And how does that feel to you all, right? Does that feel like the right amount, or would you wish people would stay on longer, or would you wish that maybe they've given their gifts, right, and it's time for them to move on and to refresh the membership of the board? I think that can be part of your conversation when you're thinking about performing 3-year terms. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
So it does vary, right? You might want to also think about it in the context of thinking about your high-performing board of the future. If you're doing that work, that's where you can have those conversations as a board and really come to an agreement on what the sweet spot is and how to incentivize and how to set up the policy so that you can encourage people to serve for that amount of time. That's probably not the most satisfying answer, but that's kind of where I am on it. Jenny, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I would be concerned about a 6-year term, because what if you've got a board member who's not fitting in well? Not that you don't have hopefully in your bylaws the mechanism to address that, but it can be messy and hard. And so a 6-year term is a really long term. I think 3-year terms is probably, not knowing a lot about the system is probably what I would recommend. My guess is kind of like credit unions, you're a pretty complicated, organization. And so I think 2-3-year terms is probably maybe a little too little, right? 6 years, I think making a commitment to a health system, I don't know, I'm interested in Aaron's thoughts, but I think making a commitment to a health system at least of 6 years, 9 years probably at the most, right? Because our rule of thumb is that you want a healthy balance of historical continuity on the one hand and renewal. And you have to decide what that balance is for yourself. What I would be concerned about a 6-year term is if you get somebody that you really can't live with, it's messy to get them off. And if you can't get them off easily, you got them for 6 years. And having somebody on the board who's a bully, and I use that word really intentionally, there are bullies in the workplace today still. It's still like the playground out there. It can be really damaging to a board and to a C-suite. Yeah. So I like the 3-year terms. Aaron, your thoughts on this?
And Mary, I know you raised your hand. I just want to answer for Jenny. Yes, typically, Chuck, across our system, as we've tried to standardize the bylaws, for consistent governance practices, it takes time, but we've tried to coalesce around 3-year terms for the exact reasons that Jenny and Paul mentioned, right? There's sort of a steep learning curve up front. And it seems like it's the sweet spot, and it seems like it's fairly standard. So that's something that at least where we've been able to strive for that. I know that some of our hospitals have that. So I'm seeing St. Joe's, UMMC, UMCAP. And that's something, Chuck, if you wanted to, we could certainly talk about offline as follow-up, but for those exact reasons.
Yeah.
Mary, I think, did you have your hand up?
A quick question, really about the disconnect between what's valued on the board versus what's recruited on the board. I know you mentioned that you'd be doing some further studies, but what are your early observations regarding that disconnect?
Part of it is, I think it's a particular challenge that credit union boards face. Of course, the research was with them. They tend to lack in demographic diversity in a very dramatic way. And part of it is just the history and the way that the credit unions kind of came to be and how they've operated over the years. And at the same time, their customers, their clientele has become much more diverse, right? And so they're sort of facing that crisis of, oh my gosh, our board is very white and very male, and our customers, our members are not. And we need to address this because it could become an issue in the future. That's sort of the maybe the sort of baseline kind of thinking, I think, that drives that number up. And at the same time, I think folks really struggle to understand how demographic diversity in particular can be a benefit, can contribute to the board in a meaningful way. And so people kind of think about it as window dressing, like, oh, we've got a diverse board, aren't we great? And nobody can, we're beyond reproach. But understanding how to unlock that diversity and put it to productive use is something that folks haven't quite figured out yet. And so they see the value in terms of maybe the window dressing part of it, but they don't understand quite how to leverage those gifts in the boardroom. That would be my first pass. Jenny.
Well, I think that's on the diversity finding, right? On the diversity question, right? When we asked, what do you prioritize? Diversity came out as number 1, and then it slipped to 6 for valuation, right? But I think overall, the disconnect, if you ask me what that, and that's really kind of a bee in our bonnet. We want to know why specifically around diversity. That's concerning to us. We want to do more research on that specifically. But I think the broader thing that study tells me is board members and boards in general for a really long time were told you need a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker. And you're gonna fill out your board based on matrix, right? Based on those slots. And I think there's a shift. I think that what that tells us is what those splits and all of those indications, right? They were all like, one was highly valued and one was, the prioritization was different. And I think what it's saying is boards need to start saying, what do we value? That's the question you need to ask yourself. What do you value in the boardroom? By the way, I think you should value diversity. And then make sure that you're prioritizing for that, what you value when you go to find it. Don't just assume that what you used to value, you should value today. And what you value today, by the way, you may not value in 6 years or 9 years. When the board of today is getting ready to rotate off, it might change because your hospital system might grow, or you might be expanding in certain ways, or you might, I don't know, right? But what you value today might not be the same as you value tomorrow. And my concern is that people are stuck in this old way of thinking about board nominations of, well, we got to have a lawyer, right? We got to have somebody in marketing. We need to have somebody in whatever. But the reality is, listen, I think people who go to law school have really great minds. I think they can deduce. I think they can write. I think there's a whole host of skills you get. I did not go to law school, by the way, but I think there's a whole host of skills you get from going to law school. But I also think that if any of your hospital systems need a lawyer, you're not going to turn to the lawyer in the room. You're going to turn to your general counsel, who's probably going to turn, if you really need a lawyer, you're going to turn to your general counsel, or you're going to hire outside counsel. You're not going to get legal advice from the lawyer in the room. You're just not. So if you want a lawyer in the room, great. Get a lawyer in the room, because lawyers are educated in a certain way, to think a certain way, to write a certain way, to analyze a certain way, but not because you're going to get legal advice from that person.
Yeah.
Does that make
You know,
sense?
Yeah, what you said kind of brought it home for me. I think we have to go back a step and make sure we're calibrating what we value with the corporation strategy.
Exactly. That's exactly the case, because the strategy is going to change over years, right? Who you are today, what your 3, 5, 6, I don't know what your planning horizon is, what it is today, and what that plan is today is going to be different than what it is, right? Maybe you have a plan to, go into a new area, or, provide services in a low income, I don't know. But
And I'll just,
drive who your board members are.
I'll put a bow on it, Mary, right? That's why the board needs to do the work before they start recruiting, right? So that the board can align. And going back to Marlene's question, it's also why you need that transparency, right? The board needs to know, we know what the nominations committee is going to be looking for, right? So even though this candidate with a really strong resume didn't get selected, we understand why, right? And we're not going to be upset about it. Emily, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think I'm kind of pulling on the theme that Mary raised. So if I say this back to you a little bit, is in what you've seen in the studies, it's not, perhaps sometimes there's a tendency to almost replicate the senior leadership management structure on the board on steroids versus, you said follow the strategy, and Mary said, Mary, I know, has had sort of out of the box ideas as to what kind of skill sets we want to bring to our board's table. It wouldn't necessarily think of it when you think of healthcare, but the industries that I know that she's been brainstorming on have these components that can help and fuel our strategy, whether it's AI, whether it's just production, efficiencies. You don't have to look in healthcare for that. You don't have to have a quality expert to sit on our quality committee. Maybe it's high reliability or those sort of skill sets. So it's, if I'm hearing you right, it's supplementing, taking it to the next level, pushing our strategy versus just having, in theory, what could be viewed as another layer of management.
Absolutely, because you have really skilled management, right? Maybe when you were a tiny, on the Eastern Shore, tiny country hospital with, 2 doctors, I don't even know if any of you were ever that, right? If you were a tiny country hospital on the Eastern Shore with 2 doctors and 1 nurse and a teeny tiny board, you might have had to supplement the staff, right? You don't have to supplement any of your staff, is my guess. You need people on your boards who can ask really good, really hard questions that Aaron said it'll level up the management. We want to level up your boards, right? That will level up the management, level up the board, so that you're both kind of equal partners playing doubles tennis, right? I would almost say to you, just get people who are really super smart and can ask really good questions in areas of the future for you, right? The smartest people you can find, but make sure they have good human skills too. I was telling Aaron, and I know time is up, but I was telling Aaron, I sit in on interviews for one of our clients, and they interviewed this woman for a comp and benefits committee, just a community member. She was a committee member. She was not going to be a board member. She had the most incredible resume for a comp and benefits person I've ever seen. She was the chief HRO for an international bank, for an international stock exchange, and for a huge community bank in New York City. I mean, who wouldn't want her on their comp and benefits committee, right? At the end of the interview, everybody was kind of saying, what do you think? What do you think? People just didn't get a good vibe off of her. I kind of described her as being sharp around the edges. They passed on her. And you know what they said? We can do better. And it was not because of her competency, but because of her human skills. She had all the competency in the world, but she was not going to be a fit. And this is a big, multi-billion-dollar organization. And they were like, she's great on paper, but we can do better.
So I know we're at time and we've started losing folks. I just want to say to Jenny and Paul, thank you so much. I thought this was really engaging and, you know, Mary, Marlene, and others that were asking about nominate, like, this is exactly what I had in mind. And I was